Welcome back to Smart Architectural Programming, your go-to channel for mastering Java one concept at a time. Today's video dives into a foundational topic that powers object-oriented Java development, working with inheritance and exceptions. So, this topic is relatively tricky, but it's still part of the exceptions chapter in our book as well, and it's very imperative that you understand this if you want to become good in Java, because exception handling is an essential component to the foundations of Java. As long as you're able to understand it and work within different dimensions of exception handling, you'll be really poised to be successful in the realm of Java programming. So let's do a brief introduction into exceptions and inheritance. So in Java, inheritance allows one class to acquire the properties and behaviors of another class. Combine this with exception handling, and you've got a powerful way and robust way to build your software, basically, right? So let's give an example here. We can define a simple animal class, right? And I'm doing this on the presumption that you've seen previous videos and you understand object-oriented programming, because that's the foundation of a lot of things that when we're going further into Java. So the presumption here is that you know object-oriented programming. If not, please go back and look over our videos on object-oriented programming and then come back to this video so you can learn more about exception handling. But this section of exception handling is related to the characteristics of classes in Java. So let's imagine we have a simple animal class, right? And a dog class, the subclass, is created that extends from the main animal class, right? Which means the dog is a subclass that inherited the characteristics of the animal class. Then we add a method make sound in both of them, right? So to a large degree, the make sound method from animal class would be inherited by the dog class. But then an overlay throws exception. Basically what would happen here is that the animal class is basically inherits the make sound of the dog class inherited the make sound of the animal class. But if we redefine it within the dog class, that inheritance wouldn't work, because we've defined specifically how the make sound method within the dog class might work. Then you can add an overlay throws exception declaration within that. But that is basically to a large degree what you need to understand here. But as methods are inherited and overridden, what happens to exceptions they declare or throw? That's exactly what we're about to explore and understand in this particular video. So with that, let's look into declaring exceptions in method signatures. So with in this particular portion, what you'll need to focus on is basically this section here, basically this code base here that we're talking about. When a method might throw a checked exception like IOE exception, this one here, we're going to highlight this so you can see that here. So when a method declares an IOE exception, right, Java requires us to either catch it or declare it using the throws keyword in the method signature, right? What does this mean? If we have a checked exception like IO exception error, Java makes it under certain rules and procedures in Java, it is imperative for us to catch it or declare it using throws keyword, right? And we can do that within the method signature as we're doing it right now. Within this method defined, we've defined it throws IO exception. If there's an error within the block, it would know that that's an IO exception that is being raised. Important thing here is to remember that checked exceptions must be declared or handled. Now that we have created now that this main class has been created, what if we create a subclass and override that method that we declared here, right? This method here, read file. And that was something that I mentioned earlier as well. But we're going into the crux or the nuts or bolts of this particular concept, so you get a better understanding of it. So how do you override methods and exception handling? So here we have a class called file manager, right? It has a method read file that throws an let me highlight this. This is a class file class manager. This is a class secure file manager this is a subclass. Let me get an eraser here. This was a little messy, but what I'm trying to highlight in yellow here is this class secure file manager, which is a subclass of the file manager as it has the extends keyword here. And then we have basically a method below here. So the point I'm coming across here is that when a subclass overrides a method, Java enforces exception compatibility. And we're going to explain that using this code base here, right? So those are the two classes highlighted in yellow. Further, basically, you know what you need to focus on here is that override keyword here. Let me use a different color here because we want to highlight that, right? So under this red, you'll notice I've highlighted something called override, @override here, and you'll see that here as well, @override. What does this mean? What does these override methods here imply is that because file not exception is a subclass of IO exception, right? The overridden method is allowed to throw fewer or more specific exceptions, right? So if you'll notice here, let me highlight that with a different color now. So if you notice here, this method read file throws an IO exception, while the same read file throws a file not found exception in the subclass. What does this mean? Let me explain it again. This is valid because file not exception is a subclass of IO exception. The overridden method is allowed to throw fewer or more specific exceptions. So we're made it more specific here, right? But you can't throw broader or new checked exception. So if you look at this line 14 onwards, here we throw just an exception, which is a very broad exception. So from here, let me use a marker here. So from here to here, it's narrowing an exception. But from, let me use a red color here to imply why that is not possible. But from here to here, that's not possible because this is broadening the exception. So this can't be possible, right? So this is particularly understanding you need to develop at this point, because you can't can't throw broader or new checked exceptions that weren't declared in the superclass method. Doing so would break the override contract that we have. Based on that, let's explore unchecked exceptions or overriding, right? So what about unchecked exceptions like null pointer exception or illegal argument exception, right? These are runtime exceptions, and Java doesn't require you to declare them, like that principle I mentioned earlier. So here, if you could look at the code base here, this is a perfectly fine code base because unchecked exceptions are not part of the method signature contract, right? So as you can see, we have a public void read file, and then if the file is null and void, we throw the illegal argument exception, right? That's the difference here, is that this is an unchecked exception which is not part of the method signature contract. So this override would not affect our particular override that we're trying to do the exceptions within the class, right? So let's look at a few real world examples to further understand what we're talking about here, right? So here we have a document processing system with an abstract base class. If you look at the code base here, we have an XML document class which narrows down the exception type in the overridden method. Let me bring on my highlighter here again, bring the normal yellow color here. Yeah, where's my color? Yellow color. Yeah. So based on this, first you need to understand we have an abstract class here. What is an abstract class? If you don't know that, please go back and look into the abstract keyword. There's a video there. These are things that you need to know before you come here. So please review that and come back here, right? Then we have a class with an XML document that extends the superclass document. A quick note though, an abstract class is basically just a blueprint. It's not a class itself, so it cannot be used. So it's usually as a blueprint to extend classes basically, or create subclasses. So as you can see, the XML document class narrows the exception type in the overridden method, right? So here what you need to understand is that the other one just provided us an exception here. So we have an abstract method here. It's telling us it must have this method here that throws the IO exception, right? As a blueprint, the blueprint of the superclass, which is going to be used to create subclasses like the XML document here. When we override that and throw the file not found exception, right? It adheres to the contract because file not exception is a subclass of IO exception. So it works, right? So that is something you need to understand here. In real world, it basically comes as an abstract example. In the document class, we have an abstract method that tells us exactly that this is the blueprint of your subclasses. And in the subclass, we further define that or narrow that down. This is one of the key examples that you can see on the usage of throw exceptions, contract methods that we might create and then use inheritance in further subclasses, right? That's how practically it might be used. So based on that, what are some of the best practices when combining inheritance and exceptions in Java? Let's discuss some of them. There are 4 of them mainly. Number 1, we need to narrow exceptions in overridden methods whenever possible. Number 2, avoid throwing generic exceptions like exception or throwable. Number 3, use custom exceptions to communicate intent. And number 4, declare only those exceptions that the caller can meaningfully handle and identify. So that's a wrap on today's deep dive into inheritance and exception handling in Java. So if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new video from our book from us on the Introduction to Java series. Furthermore, read more into our Introduction to Java book, which is now available from Smart Architecture Programming. With that, we're going to wrap up, and we'll see you in our next video. Thank you.